So this is a disclaimer to anyone and everyone listening to this particular podcast on Spotify, on Google Podcasts, on Apple Podcasts, wherever the hell you're listening to this podcast. This particular episode, you may want to check out our YouTube channel. It is Midnight at the Spaghetti Factory, where you can see all of our episodes. It's really just me and Rainwater's ugly mugs chatting. But this particular episode is going to be a little bit different. We're talking about the fundamentals today, the principles of design.
Back to basics.
Yeah, so we're going to walk through that and talk with you guys because we realized that there's some of you who just art and you don't have any kind of like formal education. I mean, everybody has art class in high school and elementary school with, oddly enough, spaghetti art, and so on and so forth, finger paints, that kind of thing. But in terms of actual like higher education, both Rainwater and I attended this wonderful college.
Savannah College of Art and Design.
Yes, sir. And we paid a whole bunch of money to get this education, and we're passing it on to you for free.
Yeah, let's save y'all some bucks. At least like early requirement courses at the very least.
Yeah, what did they call those classes? The ones that they made us take that had nothing to do with your particular major.
General requirement.
Is that what they were? Core classes
That's
or whatever they were? Yeah.
Yeah. That's how I remember it.
We're going to knock out some stuff. So anyway, we're going to talk about it. We're going to make this a little bit fun. There's going to be visual aids today, boys and girls, and people of other choices. We're going to walk through the principles of design, and Rainwater has gotten some visual specific examples to demonstrate them. We'll also be talking about them and how you can transmute, however you want to correlate, into other art mediums, which is what I do frequently when I'm writing or filmmaking. But I don't have any visual aids. I'm too lazy to gather a portfolio for an episode. But Mr. Rainwater here went above and beyond for you guys. So please, again, check out our YouTube channel because this is an episode that will best help you by viewing it.
I think having the visual aid will help when we start making further analogies about how these ideas can be applied into other things.
Absolutely.
For sure.
So let's kick it off. Number 1 on our list for principles of design. And by the way, you can probably just look this up online yourself if you want to.
Yeah.
But we're going to walk through it right now one by one. These are probably important things to know. You've heard these things all before, but they are the building blocks on which to use their tools, I guess you could say, or skills, or I don't know how you want to correlate them as. Are they tools or are they skills or are they? I don't know what I would exactly.
I would call them. I was thinking about that a lot today while I was putting together all these visual aids, and I would call them like conceptual, like cornerstones for design. They're basically like tried and true formulas that work and can be applied in very generalized ways, right? So for our first cornerstone is balance. And as defined here, balance is the distribution of the visual weight of objects, colors, texture, and space. If the design was a scale, these elements should be balanced to make a design feel stable. In symmetrical balance, the elements used on one side of the design are similar to those on the other side. In asymmetrical balance, the sides are different but still looked balanced. In radial balance, the elements are arranged around a central point and may be similar. So I have to admit, on my part, when I was putting together these, these examples, I forgot, I kind of overlooked the later aspects of balance, but we'll come up with some things on the fly as we go through this. So let's get started, I guess, and I'll get up some visual aid real quick. Let me make sure that it is viewable on the screen. I've put together several examples from my own art, my own work. A lot of them are either stuff from Trailer Park Warlock, visual banners that were for advertising the comic on Webtoon, or from my other comic, Bat Monster. And Bat Monster particularly has a lot of. It's interesting. I feel like because I've talked about this before, but Bat Monster is kind of like a practice comic. So I found that there was a lot of very easy to find examples in Bat Monster because I kind of was going for a lot of tried and true examples as I was making it. So, Jow, on your end, I just want to make sure you can see what I got up.
Nope.
You cannot.
Oh, now we can.
You can?
Yes, now it's there. There's that gray box is back again.
Okay.
It's up in the upper left-hand corner on my screen.
I don't know why there's a gray box, but
it might not be there in the record.
Yeah, as long as it's not there in the recording.
If not, I'll just have you send me the actual file that you're doing, and I will overlay it during when I edit the YouTube video. Which, again, to all of our listeners and not viewers, I put a lot of work into our YouTube videos and make them fancy with graphics and such. So you'll be sure to check that out. So if you're watching this, you probably don't have a problem, and we should just stop talking about it and move on. So go for it, Mr. Rainwater. Balance.
Yeah. So this first example comes from this is the season finale for Trailer Park Warlock Season 2, and I'm using this as an example for balance. It's an example for a lot of different aspects. It's a good example for emphasis as well, which we'll get to later. But I'm using this as an example for balance because this would be considered it would be considered balance in the sense that we have one major object, our set of objects in the foreground, right? We have the main character Jake, and there's this crystal ball, and he's balanced out by characters to both sides of him. So we got other characters that show up within Season 2, and those help direct all of the attention towards the center, which in the center we want to see the logo. And that was the whole idea behind the design, is we want to concentrate all the focus on the center, but in order to do that, I'm trying to balance out elements in the background to help focus all of that attention inward towards the center of the composition. So generally, like when we talk about stuff like that in regards to balance, and we're going to try something here as I switch to a new picture. Let me make sure on your end you see the new picture, Jow.
Big gray box.
Big gray box. Okay. Well, so I'm sorry, Jow, that you can't see what I am presenting right now, but we will nevertheless go forth. I attempted to change it, and we'll see if that works.
There we go.
Excellent.
Okay, bunch of baseball bats and stuff.
Yeah, I'm getting the hang of it.
All right.
Of this Skype business. So this time, pretty similar premise to the last composition, but this is numerically we're using balance in the sense that our main character Jake is on both sides of him. We see the same number of elements, right? And this sort of hammers in not only just like balance in terms of composition, but also kind of hammers in on like the gag of like Jake as a warlock is doing some kind of weird esoteric ritual with
peanuts and Cracker Jacks.
Yes, exactly. And we'll do one more visual example of balance, and then we're going to talk more about ways in which balance is applied outside of just visual language. So let me get this real quick. All right. It should be up on your end now, Jow. All right. Great.
We got it.
We're cooking. We're cooking with gas. So this is more of what I would call closer to what we were talking about in terms of asymmetrical balance, in the sense that there's a dividing line right in the middle of this composition. You can see very plainly. And then elements are arranged on both sides to essentially in different degrees. So like In the top left corner, we see Jake and Dutch is the penguin right here. And then in the bottom right corner, we're focusing our attention on this golem watering this plant. And then, of course, we also have the logo right here. So, like this, it's easy to say, it would be easy to say that the right side takes up the most amount of attention. And so to balance that out, we have less stuff in the bottom left corner here to basically act as a counter lever, essentially. Because if it was just like, you drop more text or font or something important in this bottom left corner, it becomes too busy. So that's where asymmetrical balance becomes kind of important, is you're figuring out how to like properly weigh you're figuring out how to properly weigh where the viewer's attention is going to be on the screen and what they're going to want to pay attention to. So let's get into some of the more abstract ideas in regards to balance for composition. Jow, do you have any particular things you might want to bring up right now?
I'm thinking of something. I'm going to try and use some pop culture type references because I feel like that's going to be the best way for the most listeners to comprehend what it is that we're getting at. So, in terms of like balancing character, if you look at something like Avengers Infinity War, you have really one big main bad guy, Thanos, who's crazy tall, already jacked, really super powerful. And then on the other side of that, you have a couple dozen Avengers who are half of his size and not really, some of them are definitely capable of fighting him, but the way that they structured that particular story, when we start that movie, Thanos already has one or at least two, maybe even three of the Infinity Stones already in his gauntlet. So he's got a couple of powers, quote unquote, up his sleeve. And if you look at that, I mean, his minions are somewhat of a thorn in the side of the other Avengers, yes. But in terms of a threatening kind of balance of character power, not really. We're all pretty sure that they're all gonna the minions are gonna get disposed of, the lieutenants, as they're referred to in many writing books, the Threshold Guardians, whatever you want to refer to them as. But Thanos himself is the big bad, and he needs to be the one fighting the Avengers, which he does, and he needs to at least have some kind of level of believability with his physical attributes. So they gave him that. They gave him a couple of powers. His stature is a lot bigger than the rest of them. His muscle build, his I don't know how I would refer to it, but like his skin texture is incredibly tougher. He's thick-skinned, I guess you could say, compared to them. They literally pull that out and point that out at the end of the first movie, where they do all this shit to him. They like drop like a moon and all this kind of stuff, and he's a little cut above his eye, and he goes, all that for a drop of blood. And it's like you start getting the idea that not only is he formidable against several of these characters who have gone against other villains in the past, but he might actually outweigh them in terms of power. And it's a design of balance in terms of, you look at one person and you look at several and you say, well, the several people are going to win. They're going to gang up on him and beat him. But the balance that is done in the writing supports the idea that the one is just as powerful, if not more, than the many. So that is probably a very good example. Another one that I was thinking of was Batman and the Joker. So you look at Batman, and he is a very rich, very control-minded individual. He's very much about, keeping things under control, the rule of law. And then you have the Joker, who balances that out with chaos. And the Joker, he steals money, this and that, when there's a bad writer attached. But he is kind of a ragtag kind of guy. You know what I mean? And that's one of the things that I think they got right in The Dark Knight, was that he wore kind of like ragged clothes. It wasn't millionaire playboy in a bat suit that was developed for the military and fighting and stuff. No, he's just got a bunch of random assortment of clothes that he's thrown together and cheap ass makeup that he throws on his face, and it's that balance. Which is going to move into one of the things we're going to talk about later, which is like contrast. Is contrast on the list? I always think that it is.
It isn't on the list,
it's not.
But it's something we should bring up for sure.
I think it'll
come up.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's coming up right now.
Exactly.
The contrast itself is actually contributing to the balance.
Yeah, I mean, that's I would describe what you're talking about as like a dualistic balance versus like an asymmetrical balance in regards to the last example. So you have that it's that notion of like the unstoppable force versus the immovable object.
Yes,
basically.
Absolutely. And then last but not least, and I'm not even going to name a particular thing because it's in every single thing, but if you look at any of the rom-coms that have ever worked, the whole idea is the balance between two particular characters. Typically, you have some kind of guy who's cold-hearted, kind of an asshole, does this or that, and then you have the lovable, sweet, girl that just wants to find love and keeps dating all these assholes. And you look at them and they kind of balance each other out because he's got some kind of an edge that she needs because she's too much of a nice pushover, and she's got too much of a warmth that he needs because he's too cold-hearted and easy to drop and not care and this and that. So they balance each other out, and that's what especially that's what makes conflict. The clashing of those two that creates that balance in the center, I guess, of the scale. It's not just the scale itself. It's when the two things join in the middle, and then it balances right on the middle. So I guess that would be my third and final example of balance and character.
Those are great story examples because, what you kind of laid out was asymmetrical balance with the Avengers. Example, and then with Batman and Joker, that's the dualistic balance, and then with the rom-com example, that's I don't have quite the word for it, but it's like almost Taoism, like a yin yang sort of like two elements together make a whole.
Yes,
kind of balance.
It's very I guess one of the other things that we're going to get to is the unity, the harmony that comes out of a balance.
Yeah, exactly.
And it works.
Great way. Yep.
So you touched upon this particular principle when you were talking about some of the first Trailer Park Warlock slide that you showed. Emphasis, which is the part of the design that catches the viewer's attention. Usually the artist will make one area stand out by, and here's one of the words we used, contrasting it with other areas. The area could be different in size, color, texture, shape, etc. Now, I noticed in the graphic that you showed us, where it was like the season finale and the crystal ball in the center, to point out the contrast that allowed for that emphasis, was that a lot of the things around the crystal ball were in a little bit darker of a shade, and the center of the crystal ball was lighter, and eyes are typically drawn to the brightest point of a frame. I don't know why. I think that it's just some kind of human instinct. But
I think it's because just naturally as mammals, we're attracted to light anyway, right? Because light is safety.
Yes.
Darkness is uncertain.
It's danger and chaos. Absolutely.
Exactly. So it is I think it is a subconscious sort of psychological thing. And then also, another thing that you can be used to create that contrast is you don't necessarily have to do dark light. You can also do saturated and desaturated. And, I'm sure I know that you're aware of this, but like in film, a lot of times the technique that's used is backgrounds are blurred out, right? So that you can pay attention to stuff in the foreground or midground.
Yes.
And that is a way that's not the same as like desaturation, but it's like resolution.
The emphasis.
And you make
the focus is what's the depth of field and all that kind of stuff, which is why, and I guess I'll just touch on this really quick. There's something called a split diopter effect. Are you aware of what this is?
I've never heard that term.
Okay, so a split diopter is it's a physical thing. You've seen it before. I guarantee you've seen it. I was just watching a movie today. I want to say, what movie did I watch today? Oh, I watched Tombstone. It happened in Tombstone, and I rolled my eyes. It happens a lot in a lot of 80s, 90s movies. Less in the 2000s, less nowadays, but it does still happen here and there. It happens a lot in. I don't know if you watched this show, Smallville.
I actually watched a little bit of it when I was your roommate.
Okay.
So I do remember a little bit.
So a split diopter effect is a physical effect that they do on a camera where the camera focuses on two different things at once. One and it's not like a wide depth of field, like a deep depth of field where everything is in focus. You have this weird thing where someone's in close up, and then there's like a weird blur line that goes like right down the middle of your screen, and someone's in the background, and certain things in the background are out of focus, but the person or the character is not. And it's always like a weird, really jarring effect that happens. And people are like, oh, both things are in focus at the same time. And it's like the number one rule when you're telling a story, especially in cinema, is to allow your audience to immerse themselves within the story. Don't remind them that they're watching a movie or reading a comic book. Yeah. You can do that occasionally and break the fourth wall, and it becomes a style like Deadpool or Scream or whatever it is that you want to talk about. But
or you push it too far, like J.J. Abrams in like a lot of the Star Trek movies, where it's just lens flare after lens flare, and it's like, oh, okay.
It allows you to stop as an audience member to stop enjoying being in the moment, because it's almost like where you have a safe seat in the middle of the chaos and action that's going on. But when you get pulled out of the experience, it kind of invalidates the reason that you're there. So anyway, that's one of the reasons why I hate the split diopter effect. I don't think people know why they should use it, and the reason is they shouldn't, in my opinion. But the point that I'm getting at is the emphasis is jarring. Your eyes don't know where to look. That's the whole point of the depth of field that you're referring to. The focusing is this is what you're supposed to be looking at. You're pointing the person, because if I told you right now, focus on the screen in front of you, and focus on me on your screen, and also focus on the monitor that you're staring at. You can't do it because you only have two eyes. They direct in the same direction. They blur everything else out, and they focus in on one thing. You're distracted if you're doing both. You're just ping-ponging.
Yeah, it's a really important principle, and I think that's ultimately what all these principles exist for, is to build a hierarchy within your design structure. So you decide and determine what elements are going to be your priority, right? Because every picture or every story, every story has a main character. Every picture has a main focus. And so getting into this, we'll pull up some examples in regards to talking about emphasis. And I will pull it up real quick, make sure it's on your end, Jow. It takes a second, it seems like. How about now?
Yep, it's up there.
So this is another Trailer Park Warlock banner, and I'm using this as an example for emphasis. Pretty similar, actually, to the very first one in some ways. But now I chose this one for emphasis because this is an asymmetrical composition. It's not centrally organized. It's the elements that we want to pay attention to are in the bottom right corner. But in order to bring our attention to it, once again, a big bright light is used, right? There's the light from this UFO that we can see that's also beaming up this cow. It's beaming right down on Jake, right? And that's where we want to pay attention to, because that's the main character of the story. And then also to further emphasize his centrality to the story, he's surrounded on the sides of other characters, supporting cast. But on top of that, background colors are desaturated to further help pop everything that goes on in our focal point, which is in this bottom right corner, but also just in general in the right third of the panel. And so that's one example of emphasis. Let's bring up another. This next one is from Bat Monster, and I will get it on Jow's screen in just a moment. Should be up now. Yep. And this is emphasis that is made out of just sheer size. And so we could also bring this up as an example for proportion for later on. But it's emphasis because there's nothing else for you to focus on, right?
Yeah.
And you'll notice too in this composition, everything's pretty much green, right? It's some aspect of green. So like colors out as a compositional tool in terms of like where you're going to focus your eyes. In this composition, it's used more for the purposes of evoking mood, and like tone for the scene. So compositionally, what I wanted to demonstrate was just how big this thing, right, this big eyeball monster is, and that's how it is, right?
Yeah.
So that's one other example for emphasis, and then let me get up the last one here for emphasis, and it's going to be pretty much the same as the last one, almost in a lot of different ways. Actually had emphasis was a hard one for me to find variations because I mean often this is what close-ups exist for, right? In cinema or whatever,
Sure.
close-ups exist for the whole purpose of is it up on your end, Joe?
Yeah.
Okay. Close-ups exist for the whole purpose of emphasizing the emotions of the character who's central to that particular shot or scene. So, like I said, pretty much similar. It's another close-up, and we see this strange talking single eyeball monster. There's a lot of single eyeball monsters in Bat Monster. And to further emphasize this, the background kind of trails off and desaturates so that once again our eye is really focused on this white space, right? That is for this main character and or the main character of this shot. So that's it for my examples for emphasis. Let's kind of get into going into more other examples in terms of storytelling or anything else outside of just visual art.
Before I do that, I did want to point out one special thing about the emphasis that I don't think. Oh no, actually, you know what? Take it back. That'll be that falls on our next principle. So I'll hold
Okay.
my tongue on that. I think I need to remind people that emphasis in art is probably the pivotal principle in my opinion because emphasis is theme in terms of storytelling. It's what the point is. It's why. It's both why you are telling the story and why the audience is reading. Or even just or watching or looking. So like I was thinking about it when you showed your frame about the giant eyeball monster. The emphasis is on that particular monster, and I'm watching myself, and I'm like, wow, by making him him or her or it, whatever it is, that size. You have delegated an importance of it. It's like, this is a massive threat. Or if it's a joke, it's not. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the size itself lends that idea to the viewer of, hey, this is important. Look at this. And the moment I looked at the monster, I'm like, wow, this is important. This is threatening. This is dangerous. This is big, both literally and figuratively. But then that led me to, and this is going to take me into the next principle, but I'll backtrack, what the monster was looking at. Because once I got an idea of, oh, this is a big monster, this is threatening, this is a problem, wait, the monster is looking at something. My eyes followed the eye line of the monster. And that drew me into the story. It's like, oh, here's the big problem. Wait, what's the problem going to do? How are we going to solve this? What's the problem going after? What's at stake? So immediately the point of you putting that much emphasis on the monster starts raising questions. It's drawing me into the story, and I start looking for answers. And it's the same exact thing when you look at a theme, when you're writing a story. So if you look at something like Back to the Future, what's the particular theme of Back to the Future? Well, they say several different things, but I would argue the theme of Back to the Future is uttered by Doc, by Marty, and then at the very end of the film by George McFly, which is if you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything, which is what Doc tells Marty. Marty has to really learn that kind of concept, that if he can figure this out, he can solve problems and he can get everything he wants in life. He bestows that knowledge again to George later in the film, and then George has to figure out that he needs to summon the courage to fight Biff in that moment to save Lorraine, and then he starts getting everything he wants. But the theme is what resonates, and if you put emphasis on it throughout a particular story, that is the takeaway. That's why you're telling it. That's why the audience is there. That's why they watch it again. That's why they buy all the merchandise. Nobody gives a shit. You know what I mean? Like, you can look at something and be like, that's a cool design. And yes, there are some people who are aesthetically obsessive with just aesthetics, where they just like something, they think it looks cool. I don't know what their attraction is to it. It's probably got something to do with their personal psychology, whatever. But if you want your particular artwork to be a hit, in my philosophy, that theme needs to be resonating with universal audiences. That's the way to do it. Another example I would cite, and this is something I've been dying to do. I was going to wait until our October podcasts, because I can't wait to do. We're going to do all like horror and stuff like that in October. But there is a massive underappreciation, and no one seems to understand what the theme of the 1978 John Carpenter Halloween movie is. And they state it clear as day in the first act of the film, which is that fate never changes. Fate, in particular, is unchanging. And the fate that's being referred to is death. Now, if you look at it, yes, it's just a slasher film with a psycho who escapes from a mental asylum, and he starts murdering people, and he's wearing a mask, and there's jack-o'-lanterns, and there's a crazy psychiatrist that's trying to hunt him down, and yada, yada, yada. That's the plot. That's some of the fun stuff. That's what buries the theme, so we're not bored. It's not a sermon. Yeah. But if you look at the main character of Laurie, the emphasis on her story the entire film, aside from all the slashing and the creepy atmospheric visuals and the awesome score, this is a repressed young woman who puts her entire life on her studies and doesn't live. She's not asking out the guy to the dance. She's not going to the dance. Everybody else is out having sex with their boyfriend and then celebrating Halloween and having fun, watching movies, carving jack-o'-lanterns, doing all this. She's babysitting. And then she takes on her friend's babysitting duties, and they let them walk all over her. And she's not enjoying her life at all. And the point of the movie is, your fate's not going to change. You are going to die. Enjoy your life while you can, because the boogeyman, as he's referred to in the film, Michael Myers, is death. He's the Grim Reaper. He's coming for you. You don't know when he's coming, but he's coming. And if you want to waste your life just being a bookworm and not having fun, not taking chances, not doing risks and stuff like that, you are doomed. And that is one of the reasons why I think she survives and this and that. But I could get into my philosophies about Halloween all night. The point of it is, the theme is resonated several times throughout the story that Laurie is not living her life to the fullest. And if you watch that movie, outside of the opening scene, the first on-screen kills don't happen till like an hour into the movie. Like, everything happens within like the last half hour, 45 minutes-ish of that film. Yep. And it's because there's been an emphasis the entire time about a theme, about living your life, about doing this and that. So I would say the emphasis in storytelling is absolutely about the theme, the why you're there, the why this frame exists. When you did that particular frame, again, with the giant eye monster, why does that frame exist? Well, to show you that there's a giant monster. That's the point of it. Why waste my time? It's I'm rambling, I know. This is the only Shakespeare quote that I fucking live and die by, which is brevity is the soul of wit, which is get to the fucking point. Like, don't waste my time. I want to know why I'm here. Get to the point. Make your point. And that's emphasis. So now let's move on to...
Yeah.
Unless you had anything you wanted to throw in on that.
What? Oh no, I liked what you had to say in regards to emphasis. I don't know if there's much else to say about it other
I
than
think I used up all the words in the vocabulary.
yeah. Well, there's a lot of things that you said that also will be interesting to bring up in regards to when we talk about repetition, right, later on,
Yes.
because that's repetition used to aid the tool of emphasis, and but that's for then.
That'll be
Let's talk
after.
about
Yeah, that we got two more to hit before that. But I
Yeah.
started touching on this one already, which is movement, and it's the path that the viewer's eye takes through the work of art, often to focal areas or focal points. Such movement can be directed along lines, edges, shape, and color within the work of art. And I noticed this in every single frame that you've shown, because naturally our brains are just trained to read from left to right, whether it's words or images. We start on the left hand, we top left hand, and make our way to the bottom right hand corner of whatever it is that's in front of us. And I've noticed that the eye lines in a lot of your work, Mr. Rainwater, are directing us. But the work that you have up now, there are no actual eye lines. I mean, there's eyes on those objects that I'm seeing, but I can definitely see where you put some leading lines in there. So go ahead and talk about that.
So I brought this up as an example for movement because movement can either mean you're expressing action, or you're doing something to lead a person's gaze to a certain particular point in the composition. So the main thing that functions as as a tool for moving the eye is this snake kind of looking shadow on the top of the ceiling. But on top of that, we also have the way that these receding figures going into the background as they get smaller and smaller further emphasizes the movement towards this bottom right corner. So that's really all I have to say on this panel in regards to why it is that way. And like I said, movement is this idea of you're either conveying motion or you're conveying some notion of how you of going from one corner of a composition to the other corner of the composition. Or it can also be, this doesn't necessarily have any, this is basically kind of the same composition as the last panel, top left to bottom right, and then we'll do one more. I chose this one as another example of movement in using, in comics, this is a way of conveying motion in action at the same time. And we'll get into this too when we talk about rhythm. But basically, in this composition, we see a person in underwear walking across 3 panels. But in the last panel, we don't actually see the figure; we just see the footprints of the figure having passed. And so we can infer the movement of this character by their footprints. And so that conceptually, you're getting the idea of movement without actually seeing movement. Because when you're doing when you're doing two-dimensional or any kind of still image composition, you have to figure out how to convey the idea of movement because you cannot express movement in its actuality. So that's basically all I have really to say about movement as a two-dimensional principle. I feel like this is going to be very abstract in order to convey in regards to story, but I'm curious if you have any ideas there, Jow?
I mean, there's different ways to look at it. I'm coming from a film background, so for me, movement is literally movement. Literally, like the camera has to move. If you hear Kevin Smith talk about, I think it was An Evening with Kevin Smith. It was either the first one or the second one. He talks about Ben Affleck talking to him about, can you move the goddamn camera? Just stop, setting it up on a tripod, pointing it in one direction, hit record, the stuff happens, and then turn it off, and that's it. It's just a static shot. The movement that actually takes place in that particular storytelling is literally just moving the camera's eye. The lens has to move, whether it's tilting up and down, panning left to right, dollying in and out, trucking. It doesn't matter what it's particularly doing, but the movement is very indicative of mood and tone of what's going on. I mean, if you look at something like a Paul Greengrass film, the camera is shaky as fuck. It's like Blair Witch in an action movie. And that particular movement is creating chaos. If you watch something like Batman Begins, it was something that Christopher Nolan tried to instill into the fight scenes. He was doing close-ups, and he was making the camera kind of jarring and stuff like that during the fight scenes, which was meant to put you in that particular chaos of a fight, which is a struggle. It's not always clean and choreographed and everything like that. Now, thematically, from watching movies, our brains are trained to expect wide shots during fights. So that didn't go over very well. And if you notice when you watch The Dark Knight, he pulled the camera back, and it's a lot more steady when they do it, because people want to watch the choreograph and they want to know what's going on. They don't really necessarily want to feel the actual chaos of the fight. And I get that. Yeah, there's an expectation when it comes to these things that you want to be able to watch. You don't want to be in the midst of it. But there are action scenes where the chaoticness movement of the camera indicates what's going on. But then also, if you look at something like a horror film, you have things like point of view. There's several, probably hundreds now, but like so many horror films will put the viewer in the POV of the camera as if they were the killer watching what's going on. And of course, when that's happening, there's no chaos. It's very slow and brooding, and it's building up tension, and it's drawing you into, oh God, just get it over with, just get it over with, just get it over with. It's making you dread the things that are going on. That movement is dragging you. So it's very important to understand the tone of what you are trying to do in terms of genre when you're moving a camera. Moving is, if you try to do, like the shaky cam worked in the Blair Witch because it was informed by the particular plot. You know, a bunch of people making a documentary. This is found footage. They're in the middle of the woods. They're running around at night, tripping over branches and shit like that. They're running away from this ghost witch thing. But if you were to put that into a Michael Myers movie, people would riot. It's not the kind of expectation that they have. It's not that type of horror. Same thing with an action movie. When you go to a Jason Bourne movie, camera's all over the place because it just is. That's just the director's style. When you go to an Avengers movie, you got wide sweeping shots of all these fights going on because it's glamorous. It's, you know what I mean? It's not necessarily threatening. It's more fun than anything else. You're just there to observe, and you know, deep down inside, we all kind of know that the good guys are going to win. So it's kind of like, it's turn off your brain, popcorn enjoyment. But the movement is very important, because if you start violating the rules of what it is that you're showing, people get turned off. They won't enjoy it as much, and then they're not going to buy your next installment or your next work, or you're not going to get the box office that you wanted, and they're not going to get another job, and the studio head's going to say, fuck you, kid, get out of here. Things like that. Things like that do become important. So you have to know not just when to move, but how to move. I think it's a very important thing.
Oh, sure. Well, and that's a good thing to bring up too, where you know, another aspect of movement is to create the contrast of stillness as well.
Yes.
To further, you know, to further emphasize when things do start moving.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I didn't have any particularly good visual examples or anything for that, but that's certainly something that I feel like I don't have direct examples, and if any come to mind for you, Jow, in terms of filmography or whatever.
I can't think of anything off the top of my head for movement in a particular story. I mean, my mind goes to Scream for like a mystery thing. There's a book that...
I mean, I was going to say, I can imagine a scene, and I feel like I've seen this scene in a billion movies, but it's just like, you know, open sky, open blue sky, you don't see anything for like, let's say 10 to 20 seconds. And you slowly hear the sound coming in louder and louder and louder, and then something rockets past the camera.
Yeah.
So that was like an example of what we're talking about in terms of like using stillness to further emphasize when, you know, something to emphasize movement as it happens.
And it's also balanced, because that stillness and the energy that contrasts it as it comes in later is balancing out that particular moment, that shot. You know, you have the calm breeze and the blue sky, and then all of a sudden you got a rock and explosions and someone's running for their life and da-da-da. Like, that balance is what keeps you there. It's like, okay, I have an expectation, and then either that expectation is fulfilled or it's subverted, and that's what happens. Thematically, I know you wanted me to kind of talk about a little bit, and I'm not going to go too far into this, but there's a storytelling book that I live and die by, and a lot of people call it formulaic, and I don't give a shit. Those people are just wasting their time not learning how to tell stories properly. It's called Save the Cat, and it's written by this guy named Blake Snyder, and he has a rule that he, quote-unquote, emphasizes several times throughout the book, which is turn, 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 which is as you are telling a story, you need to start kind of getting into that rhythm of revealing things that the audience doesn't know, taking what the audience does know and changing it and giving you new things. So I feel like as you're telling a story, you can't just say, oh, there's a bomb that's going to go off. No, that on page 2, you have to tell me that the bomb is going to blow up 10 city blocks. And then you have to tell me that there's actually 3 bombs out there. And then you have to tell me that the bombs are triggered by radius or heat or something like that. You know what I mean? There has to be a movement in terms of your story, in terms of developing your plot, your character. Everybody talks about character arcs. Nobody really knows what it means most of the time. But if that character's not taking a step on their arc through the plot, if every scene is not moving your character to a belief that's different than when they started, if they hold a particular ideal, if they're not moving towards another ideal by the end of the film, you're wasted. The scene is pointless. I don't care how many explosions or cool monsters are in it. There needs to be movement within your character's progress.
Yeah, I like what you're saying, because then the idea, when we talk about the concept of movement in terms of composition, we're talking about conveying change.
Yes.
Whether that's change within a scene or change within macroscopically within a story.
Yep.
Like how does character go from a down and out so and so to like the hero of the moment?
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on. I feel like we humped on movement a little too long. This is one that I'm gonna have a problem really kind of extrapolating.
I did too.
Pattern, which is repeating of an object or a symbol all over the work of art. I know how I can speak on this, but I'm going to let you go first because I feel like I've talked a little too much on the last one. So
patterning is something where I didn't have any good direct examples beyond just a lot of background stuff. So a lot of the examples I used were just to sort of emphasize how I use patterning in the background to create interest, create intrigue, create just weirdness, create variety, things like that. So in this first example, we have this rainbow bat monster. I don't know what else to call it. I made the damn thing. I don't know what to call it. But in the background, there's a pattern of, and for this panel, I had chosen making a pattern out of mathematical symbols. So there's a division sign, a plus sign, a multiplication, and an equal sign.
Every Ed Sheeran album cover is in this graphic right now.
What's that?
I said every Ed Sheeran album cover is in this graphic right now.
And so, I mean, like Jow was saying with the basic concept of patterning, is you're modulating, which is to say you're using the same element over and over and over again. And you can vary it up, but the main concept or the main idea when you're using patterning is that you want to it's a way of emphasis, but it's a variety on emphasis.
Yes.
I think that's the best way that I can put it.
That's exactly how I was going to put it.
It's a variety of emphasis in that, in terms of number, instead of like with emphasis, the idea is you have one thing and that one thing is the focus. Whereas with patterning, the emphasis is the multiplication of things. So like with this other, I'm assuming this is up on your screen, Joe. I'm just going to check before I further in.
Donuts.
So yeah, donuts and French fries. So the background is pretty much entirely comprised of donuts and French fries. What does it mean symbolically? Who knows? Bat Monster just works in this particular way story-wise. It doesn't mean anything, and maybe it means everything. But the idea is I
love it.
The idea is to convey an absurd scene, right? to convey, to make people hungry, possibly as well. And then the third scene, this is actually used in a more thematic sense within the story of this particular chapter. And it's pretty much all the same face, right? But smaller to further emphasize this big face that's in the foreground. It's like this weird duck bird thing. And what that does is it creates this contrast of many to one. So going back to emphasis, here's a way that we're using patterning to emphasize a figure in the foreground or a figure that we want the reader to focus on. So those are all my visual examples of patterning. I guess one last thing to say about it is that all the examples I brought up were very much in line with focusing. Well, not necessarily. Okay, so I would say the very first example was an abstract use of patterning. And patterning often in visual art is used for abstract purposes of not necessarily conveying a definitive idea so much as conveying something that is interesting to the eye. Like sometimes there's art that just exists to be interesting to the eye and not necessarily for purposes of conveying a theme, conveying an idea, although you can certainly do that all the time. But that's all I had to say really on patterning. Jow, if you have anything on the subject.
Well, I do want to point out that the next principle is basically the same thing. I don't know if I can find a way to differentiate it, but after pattern, the next principle is repetition.
Yeah, it is.
And repetition is just the repeating of something, and pattern is the repeating of something. So basically, I guess that maybe that's an art joke that someone came up with to put into the principles. It's like, hey, I'm going to actually do a pattern here and repeat my thing, but differently. So it's almost an example of itself. That's like the most meta thing ever.
Yeah. I would say that the idea that they give when they say patterning, it versus repetition, patterning has a emphasis on stillness, for lack of a better description.
Okay.
It has an emphasis on singularity. So, if you made a composition that was just a series of triangles, one set of triangle is black and the other is white, but that's your pattern,
yeah,
right? That would be how we would think of patterning. Or another, like an actual example, let's go to Stanley Kubrick, The Shining. Everybody can think of the patterning of the carpet in the hotel.
Yep.
And it exists and it's used for that film to convey an emotion, to convey a sense of eeriness, a sense of kind of otherworldliness.
Yeah.
It's an abstract feeling. You're not really sure what to feel. And he uses that a lot in a lot of his films. 2001 Space Odyssey is another excellent example where a lot of the patterning of how the spaceships are designed are used to sort of convey, like a great example, David Bauman is in the heart of Hal, right? And he's got to pull out Hal's memory to like turn him off. Well, the background is comprised entirely, it's a patterning of all these discs that comprise Hal's consciousness. So, when you initially look at the scene, you're just thinking of it as the pattern. But as you see David Bauman pulling out, these discs, it suddenly occurs to you like, oh, this is the robot's fucking mind. He's like in his mind and slowly killing him. It's no longer just a pattern. It suddenly becomes very real. So that is one way in which I could say patterning could be used in story, is to start from an abstract place where a viewer or a reader is not, you want them to start off not sure what they're looking at. You want them to start off with ambiguity, and then as you pull further in, you start to kind of unveil what it is that they're actually looking at. In the same way that if you look at a city from an airplane, it looks like a bunch of patterns of, a lot of abstract patterns of rectangles and circles and squares and houses. And you don't really think about you don't think about on a ground level like, oh, these are human beings living in here in the same way.
Yeah.
Like the popular thing of people saying, oh, everybody looks like ants from up here. And that's because you're removed from your normal human everyday ground level, and so it becomes abstract. So that's my best shot at patterning.
That's better than I would have been able to do it. Going back to my Save the Cat Blake Snyder dogmatic slave religion I have to this philosophy on storytelling. When it comes to like a pattern, I think of the B story, which is often like a love story or like a mentorship or something that's embedded into a longer story. And the way that Blake Snyder goes about telling about how to construct a B story is that it's the A story in a new light. It's this theme repetition or revealed in a different way. So an example that I would do, since we've used Bat Monster and I almost said Grad Raja. Trailer Park Warlock, Haunted. When our main character gets to this haunt that is rumored to whether or not it's real monsters, or whether or not they're killing people or not, or if it's all part of the show or whatever, there's this whole big mystery, and our main character is this little know-it-all. She's cocky and she thinks, she's untouchable and this and that. We get to the B story when she gets there and she meets a guy. And so the pattern that starts becoming shown is this unknown thing where you find out in the story, not really a spoiler, but I'll say it anyway, that he is the only one in the group that has been on the trail before. And he abandoned it halfway through, and he left people behind, and he doesn't know what happened to them, and it's been plaguing him about whether or not these people died or if that. So he's driven to find the answer about this, which is a contrast of what the main character is going through, where she thinks she knows the answer and everything like that. But by the end of the story, she's going to be in his exact same shoes. So it's almost a setup and payoff kind of deal. But the pattern it's kind of like what George Lucas talks about with Star Wars. It's like poems. These things rhyme. There's repetition that goes on because that's what provides the emphasis. Sometimes size can be used to provide emphasis, sometimes balance, sometimes movement, but pattern is like the easiest way to point out to your audience, hey, pay attention to this. Did you notice this before? If you missed it before, if you were on your phone, it's here again.
Yeah.
Just so you got it.
It's a way of building tension too.
Yes.
Because if your audience knows what's going to happen next, right? Like horror movie, I feel like you have something to say about this. You have a specific example you want to bring up.
John Williams, the Jaws theme.
Yeah. Exactly.
Da-dum, da-dum. It's the same two notes. Da-dum. And that slow and that build, that repetition of that pattern of those two notes, but then it starts moving faster, creates that thing. Dun, 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 dun. Then everybody's like, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. And that's what does it. If you notice that, like Hans Zimmer still does that kind of stuff these days, where it's just a constant loop of just the same notes going over and over and over. It's very prominent in music. You listen to a rap beat, that's all that it fucking is, until it gets to like the bridge or something like that where it breaks down and it's different. I wish we had Joe Bevel on. He could talk about that probably. But yeah, so that's kind of how that works. So I think we knocked out, unless you had anything for repetition you wanted to go into.
Let's
proportion.
Wait.
Go for it, because that's kind of something we touched on with the size of that eye monster, but go for it.
Proportion's a hard one. I actually had I did bring that up with the eye monster, that was sort of the idea. But let me read over proportion and get up some examples in just a second here. All right, so proportion is the feeling of unity created when all parts, sizes, amounts, or number relate well with each other. When drawing the human figure, proportion can refer to the size of the head compared to the rest of the body. All right, so I'm going to be honest, I got examples, but I don't really feel like they necessarily are going to hammer home all that well that particular definition. because I feel like that definition was extremely. I think it was geared uh, towards talking about proportion in regards to like golden ratio and things like that. So
Yeah.
like, any artist any 2D or visual artist, when talking about, drawing nature, drawing from life, uh, you want to have the ideal of like there are ratios, there are ways in which like most human bodies are about if you're going to draw a human, they're often about 6 to 7 head lengths
Mm.
or head heights.
Yeah.
So you want to keep that proportion in mind when you're drawing a person. Now that changes, somewhat because not everybody's the same size, right? But you want to keep that in mind when you're drawing somebody and you're like, oh, something seems off. So you have to think about, okay, what is the size of their hand to their head? Usually a hand is about the size of a little smaller than the head. Torso is usually about 2 to 3 head lengths. It depends on the person, but the basic idea is you're thinking numerically about height, about dimension. So anyway, the examples, varying away from that, the examples that I chose dealt with proportion in regards to foreground, middle ground, background. Right. This is up on your side, Jow?
Yep.
Okay. This Bob Ross style painting was used in a Trailer Park Warlock banner, and basically, very quickly, in terms of all landscapes go this way. Every single Bob Ross painting uses this format of background is a mountain, big object conceptually. Foreground is trees, right? I don't have extreme foreground like he usually does. Like there isn't a tree, like
Smacking
right
you in
here
the
because
face,
because this is actually in the finished banner. Jake was actually standing right here with a paintbrush. But nevertheless, we have a foreground where we can see a lake and some bushes. So that's literally every landscape painting that ever will be made, that has been made, etc., etc. Another example. Once again, we have foreground, and we see this chicken hanging out with this lizard person next to a fire, and we see repeated in the background the same kind of structure that's in the foreground, and that gives us an idea of it gives us an idea of depth, and we're using size to portray like how big all the things in this environment are. Next picture, same idea once again, but this time our focus is on the midground. Foreground, everything is like all these airships or whatever. We don't see a lot of them. The view of them is obscured because what we're paying attention to and what our emphasis is on is this big machine in the midground, and we get a sense of its size in comparison to all the other machines around it, because in the distance we see in silhouette all these smaller machines, and they're all the same ones as the machines in the middle ground and in the foreground. So in this way, I'm using proportion to give a sense of size, a scale, and also to create visual interest, because when this is going back to repetition and to patterning, when we're reusing and modulating elements, it can help emphasize the thing you want to focus on if the thing you want everybody to focus on looks different from everything else. So that's, in terms of 2D visualization, all of my examples in regards to proportion. What do you have any thoughts, Jow, in regards to how proportion relates to storytelling or to music or even to cooking? Or cooking might actually be yeah.
Well, seeing as that's been our most listened to episode, interestingly enough, proportion does very much matter in cooking. When you're constructing a recipe, some things have more power and weight than others. Whereas like 1 teaspoon of sugar is not nearly as sweet as 1 teaspoon of cayenne pepper. Or as powerful, I should say. So I mean, like a teaspoon of sugar is sweet, sure.
Yeah.
But the power that lies within it is not nearly as heavy as cayenne pepper or anything like that.
Same with
Ghost
like
pepper.
cinnamon.
Yes, exactly. So understanding of proportions, I think proportion speaks to an instinct within a review, an audience member, where they know something is just not right. Instinctively, we all know how a body or how life works. So like if you look at a rabbit and they have these giant ears, you're like, okay, they probably have some pretty good hearing. Do you know what I'm saying? So if they have giant ears, it's like, oh, the rabbit's deaf. Well, then that makes it a joke. That's how that proportion works in that, because you see these giant ears, you're like, oh, I know what that does. But if the rabbit can't hear, it's either a joke or it doesn't make sense. Does that make, you know what I mean? Proportion really kind of lends to instinct within your audience, where if you use proportion correctly, your audience can make assumptions, safe assumptions.
That's a really good way of explaining that. I didn't even think of it that way.
That's great. That's what proportion means to me, is whether and that's like so like if you were juggling, if we're going back to like a thematic thing where storytelling, say, a story doesn't necessarily have to be about one particular theme. In fact, it probably shouldn't be. There should be several themes competing with your attention throughout the entire story, but the one that gets the most emphasis in proportion to the others is the one that the author is standing behind what they're really trying to say to you. And I feel like when you have other things in proportion, you are lending more weight to something that is not instinctually assumed. So you can present several different ideas as themes, and the audience member could be like, well, I don't know which one I'm supposed to be following here. And as one of them becomes more apparent through the actions of the characters or the plot or whatever's going on, the proportions of how often that theme is resonating with the patterns and repetition and everything else and the principles, then it starts becoming apparent to you the things that you could not assume. So it's both those things. It's like a double-edged sword, where you can use it for good or you can use it for evil, or you can use it so your audience can make assumptions or your audience can learn. And that's where I feel like proportion kind of comes in. It speaks to that. And if you know how to wield it as an artist, and the only way to know how to wield it is to either trust your own instincts or to experiment with it. Again, the two ends of the spectrum, but it's where that's the fun of art, is playing with that particular thing to find out how it works for you, how it works for your style. Now I'm looking at proportion and I'm thinking Picasso said, yeah, fuck that. And but that's the thing, is he looked at that and he was like, no, I'm going to make the nose way smaller than the eyeballs, and the eyeballs are going to be 3 times the size of each other. The left eye is going to be 3 times bigger than the right eye, and the ear is going to be this and that and all that kind of stuff. And what he did there was he bucked the rules. He bucked your instincts of what it was supposed to be. And that's what made it interesting, because everyone at that time, if you look at like all of the art surrounding him, no one was doing anything like that. And it's what made him stand out. It was his creative signature. We talk about the artist's signature all the time. And that's something I think we need to point out here, is that, yes, while these things are important fundamentals, knowing them allows you to break them, because when you can see them and recognize them in other things, you can use them. That's really the thing here, is using them. How you use them creates your style. So
in the Picasso example is a great example, because in regards to contrasting balance to proportion, because two of them seem very similar in concept, right?
Right.
But in reality, balance. So what Picasso ended up doing in a lot of his paintings is he focused more on the balance of the painting, two-dimensionally.
Right.
Compositionally, it's balanced. Proportionally, it makes zero sense, because that's just not what he's focusing on.
Right.
Like you're saying.
That's not his emphasis.
Yeah, exactly. So, I guess, do you want to get on? Did you have anything else you wanted to say in regards to proportion, or did you want to move on to the next?
Well, I feel like moving on, we're moving backwards, because rhythm rhythm is right there again with pattern and repetition. It's literally,
Yeah, it is.
a synonym of both of those things. So I'm looking at
It
it,
really is.
and I was talking about it. It says rhythm is created when one or more elements of design are used repeatedly, repetition, to create a feeling of organized movement. Rhythm creates a mood like music or dancing, which I was talking about when I was referencing Jaws. To keep rhythm exciting and active, variety is essential. So here's, I think, where that kind of that breaks from the pattern and the repetition thing is the rhythm talks about variety. Whereas we were talking about before, like I talked about with the Jaws theme, it started off with that pattern of 2 notes, and then the 2 notes repeat. So there's the repetition. And then the rhythm was how it slowly builds, how the silences, the space, the time between each note shortens as the time goes on. And that's the actual rhythm, is creating that variety in emptiness where it gets shorter and shorter and shorter as time goes on. That's the movement, I guess you could say, of that. So I guess rhythm is different. I think I just broke that problem we were having where the pattern, like I said, the pattern is 2 notes. The repetition is that it keeps happening, and then the rhythm is how it varies when it starts happening. That's how it gets
That's a really
instilled.
great way of putting it. Yep.
For art, how do you have rhythm going in a visual sense?
Oh, okay. We can go. Yeah, let's go over that really quick, and then we'll move on to variety.
Which is the thing in this. I swear that maybe the principles of design was one big troll move to be like, I wonder if these people are paying attention.
It kind of feels that way a little bit, but I do think the idea is to, because I guess if we really broke it down, maybe there are like 4 like principles, and then everything else is like the intermixing of those principles. Basically.
I feel like there should be some proportion going on in terms of this. Like those 4 should be like 4 giant blocks, and then there should be offsets, like tangents below them where the other ones work in support of those things. And then at the very top, there should be one giant box that says, with a square in the middle of it says your idea. You know, like a food pyramid kind of. Anyway.
That might be something that I have to make later on. I like that idea though, because I think that would better portray what we're talking about. So, going into some of these examples in terms of rhythm. So we have this one. This is an image. In the background, we have the rhythm of these circular lights, and to further solidify the rhythm, I decided to pick 3 colors that were all within the same range. So yellow, orange, and red. And this was the way to vary. It varies the rhythm in terms of color, but you also have a rhythm in terms of a set range that the color exists in. And then on top of that, they're all circles of differing sizes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's like a very abstract example of rhythm. Here's a more conceptual example of the rhythm using comic panels. This is the most obvious way in comics to use rhythm, and it makes rhythm one of the most important and functional aspects of comic book making, because that's how the whole fucking show goes. Like that's how the boat moves, is through the rhythm you set through how you compose your panels. So within this image, I mean, we have one horizon line, right? And then we see like this is supposed to be some waves, right? And get the idea of like this ocean just settling and becoming quieter. In this other example, we see a donut being broken up in space. Once again, it's using rhythm for the purpose of conveying motion, conveying movement, conveying change over time. And in this particular example, this last panel is smaller than the first 3 panels to show a change in scenery, as we see Bat Monster sitting on a slice of toast next to this eyeball monster. So anyway, that is all of my examples for the rhythm. And like I said, with comics, with telling stories in regard to conveying sequences, absolutely important. And the ways that you can mix it up are there's a lot. There's an incredible amount of variety in how you can mix up your rhythm from page to page, or any, whatever the situation is.
I feel like with rhythm, what we're really talking about is time. I feel like a
Yes.
better label for it would be time or timing.
Yeah.
When I'm looking at rhythm from a like a thematic type of, not a theme, but like theatrical point of view, I guess is a way. It's the time in between certain plot points that happen. Now, when you're constructing a story, you have certain moments where your character is making a decision. There are moments when there are conflicts erupting. There's a moment when exposition is being relayed. And I think what you need to do when you're doing that is understand the relation of time between those particular moments within those subcategories. So if you're looking at so for example, I would say there's a lot of movies when people watch like something like The Witch, right? There's a horror movie. A lot of people describe that movie as slow burn. That's a popular phrase that people like to throw out there when they're watching some kind of a thriller or a horror movie, where the information that gets relayed to you is either not few and far between, but it's very steadily paced. Like it's coming like you're feeding a baby with food. And I'm going to make more analogies like that in the coming episodes, because that's where we are with my child at the moment. But it's very slow. It's spoon feeding. It's, very almost rhythmic. You're just kind of getting in there, and it's repetitive at a very understanding point, but it's those particular plot points. But then there's other things where you look at like balance of the rhythm of things. And so an example I've used for that is one of the more recent James Bond films, Casino Royale. If you look at that movie, the first half, maybe even 3/4 of the movie, is very, very action-centric, which is bucking the typical rhythm of an action spy movie. Usually you start out with the slow exposition and, the espionage and all the sexiness and all that kind of stuff is usually played out in the beginning. And some of that is still drizzled in there. But the main action sequences right within the opening of the film, you have chase sequence, you have a shooting up of an embassy, the thing blows up. Then you have like the airport thing with the plane loose on the runway and all this kind of stuff. And then by the very end of the movie, like one of the big climaxes is a card game. It's a poker game. And the rhythm in that movie goes from breakneck and it slows down by the time you get to the end of the movie. And it's very cathartic, I think, as an audience goer. I think that's one of the reasons why that movie worked, was because it was the same thing we always get, but different. It was the reverse of the usual structure that we usually get in terms of that kind of a rhythm where, we usually build up to the explosions, but here we caught the explosion and now we're coming down off of it. And I thought that was very enjoyable. I thought that was a good example of kind of using rhythm differently than it's normally used to kind of subvert expectations with people. And then you have the typical rhythm, which is, like I just said, the inverse of that, which is just build. You start off with character development and laying the exposition and the plot and the setting and this and that, and kind of letting everybody kind of find their footing. And then once they're with the character, you build. You start revealing information more and more. Like I said, turn, and you start throwing more and more information at people because they can build on the foundation that you've already given them. So both of them work. It's just a matter of what you want to do. But the rhythm, it has to be decided. And Casino, like I said, I'm gushing over Casino Royale right now. I think it's one of my favorite James Bond movies because they did that. They said, no, we're not going to ramp up to some giant, huge end of the world sequence where James Bond is trying to stop a gigantic explosion. No, he's playing poker with Lashif. That's the big oh my god thing. And by the time that's happened, like, they were so good at burying exposition and character development within the action sequences that had happened prior that slow burn happening at the end, everybody's on the edge of their seat going, what card does he have? What card does he have? What card does he have? And it's brilliant.
Yeah.
And that's how you utilize something like rhythm. Granted, I wouldn't advise doing that on your first story, but it's definitely a bold, brave risk. And if it pays off, you've made a name for yourself. You've Picasso'd rhythm in storytelling. That's the way to go about that. What do you think? Does that have I nailed that correctly, or you think I'm off base with that?
No, I think you've nailed it perfectly. And I was going to say, just to further talk about how that rhythm was used thematically too, it further emphasizes also where power exists for Lashif, where it's about the mind. It's not about the body, which is what at the beginning of the movie that's how we see James Bond as, this master of the physical world, and where his challenge comes up in the later on in the movie is in this area of psychology of the mind, which ultimately is kind of the realm of the spy, is the realm of being able to intuit what you cannot see, what you cannot pick up from just what you see around you, but from deducing from what you see in your environment.
And it's a wonderful subversion of expectation, because everybody thinks James Bond, it's been, the 90s and, even when they were doing them in like the 70s and all that kind of stuff, is all about the action, because that's what sells. That's the poster, that's the trailer, that's this and that. So when everybody says, oh, there's a new James Bond movie, they slapped a label on him, oh, he's a spy, but does he do a whole lot of spying? It's just more like sneaking around and getting caught by the bad guys, villains, and shootouts and explosions and this and that. But here, like you said, it's very much about the psychology of what's going on and understanding things that are happening that might not be noticeable to other people that you do notice because you're a spy. Like that's the point, is that you're supposed to be doing stuff like that. So I think that's definitely a way to look at rhythm when you're constructing a story, is serving your overall, again, I'm going back to this, the emphasis, the point of what you're trying to do is, we build the rhythm around it. You look at like a certain song, like I can't name the song off the top of my head, but there's an Eminem song, and I'm sure it's been done in other rap songs, but I'm a white boy, so of course I'm listening to Eminem. But there's songs where, he has the beat going on underneath him, and then the beat will stop. The rhythm just stops dead, but Eminem still keeps rapping. And it's that part of the song, everybody gets goosebumps. And it's not necessarily what he's saying, it's the fact that rhythm has stopped, and it's created an emphasis on the fact that, hold on, the beat's not as important as what I'm saying right now. Listen to me, watch my skill, look at what I'm being able to do. And you know what I mean? Like, it's serving the point of whatever he was trying to do in that moment. And that's what I think that rhythm should be.
Yeah, just as one last thing, rhythm is oftentimes defined not by what is there, but what is not there. So for going back to the comics example, rhythm isn't set necessarily by the existence of the panels. It's simultaneously the existence of the panels in the gutter space between panels. In the same way that in music is defined primarily by the space between notes and not necessarily the notes themselves. So anyway, moving on from that, let's get to, we're in the home run. So we're going to go over variety.
Yes.
Yep. Variety is the use of several elements of design to hold the viewer's attention and to guide the viewer's eye through and around the work of art. So variety is kind of a meta principle. I have examples here that are kind of both literally variety and then also has some aspects of variety of design principles. 1 second here, start sharing. And let me open up the window here. So, hold on, I'm getting myself mixed up. Okay, great. Here we are. So, I've got too many windows open. So in this first example, this was a cover for Bat Monster Book 1. And we have very literal variety in the number of different shapes of these weird amoeba-like creatures. But also compositionally, we have a variety of different things being used. We have repetition. There's repetition of these little green one-eyed monsters. We have repetition in regards to, or we have some patterning. I guess maybe it might be a better way of putting it, with this one monster right here that has all these blotches. Here's a monster that's composed entirely of eyeballs, and then we have movement with this one this monster that doesn't have any eyes, but you can trace like this long body that goes around the composition in and out, and it's supposed to be a way. This is a way of leading the eye around the composition, and ultimately we have emphasis with our one-eyed monster drinking the soda right in the middle, kind of sticking out from everything else, because this one-eyed monster doesn't have any color in compared to the rest of the monsters around it. So this is a way of using the variety of color to further emphasize the lack of color, which is the central figure in this image. Another example of variety. This is a banner for Trailer Park Warlock. Once again, a variety of different objects, which creates sort of this weird rhythm as we see objects get smaller and smaller as we move up towards the UFO over here, beaming everything up. This actually, I would not say is a good example of emphasis, because I feel like in some ways I'm just gonna critique my own composition right here. Our main character, Jake, is kind of part of the morass, and he isn't necessarily central in terms of the composition. But anyway, let's move on. Here's another example of variety in terms of, we have variety in terms of patterning, repetition of color, repetition of shape in the background to create this sort of weird abstract atmosphere. And we have emphasis on our character in the foreground, who is losing their clothes and going mad. So anyway, those are all my visual examples in regards to the variety. I don't know if you had any thoughts in regards to narrative or storytelling, Jow.
I'm going to dip back into our food analogies.
Yeah.
When you go out to eat, most people, and I can't speak towards like vegetarians, vegans, and such, but most people will balance their meal with protein, fat, carbs. Those are the three things. Now, that variety, because if you were to get, so if I got a steak, I'm going to want some kind of fat to go along with that. Well, how do I get that? Oh, mashed potatoes with some gravy or butter or whatever. That's perfect. That's got both my carbs and my fat, and the steak might have some marbling, and that's going to have a little bit mixed in. But if I were to go and get a steak, and I was also going to get a lobster, and I was also going to get a grilled chicken, and I was also going to get, I don't know, a turkey burger. That's a whole lot of protein. And at some point, as much as I love a good slice of meat, I'm going to get tired of it. It becomes bland. I don't care how flavorful it was originally. My palate craves something different. It's boring.
Yeah.
It's flat, I guess is the way to describe it. But if you look at it, no one gets, if you get a giant-ass ribeye, no one gets the same amount of mashed potatoes and the same amount of butter on, like I'm talking like volume size, on each of those things. So if you're looking at proportion, this is where that comes into play. Hero, right? The main point of your entree is that steak. So you're probably getting a giant steak. And then you have like your side character, which is the mashed potatoes. And then you have an even lesser character on top of that, which is the butter. And they're weighted differently, like calorically, if you look at them. Like the butter probably has more calories in 1 tablespoon than all of the mashed potatoes together. But it's smaller visually. It packs more of a punch. But that kind of proportion weighing keeps your palate and your mind engaged. And then once all that's done, you're like, oh, I had all of these things. I had protein, and I had a starch, and I had some fat. But now I want something sweet. All those things were salty. I want something different. I want something a little bit more. I want something sweet and chocolatey and vanilla-y. And so I'll have an ice cream sandwich when I come home. And that cures that thing. So I think when you're constructing a piece of art, you need to apply that same mentality, because if you stay on one particular emphasis, and I'm going back to theme here, people get to the point and it's like, oh, I got it. Leave me alone. It's like when you go to church. And the preacher starts preaching, and I haven't been to church in forever, so forgive me. But the preacher starts preaching at 10:30, and by the time 10:55 comes by, he's made the same point 12 times. You're like, okay, we're done. We can go home now. And then when they go on and it hits 11:15, and you're like, I got it at 10:45. We can go. I got stuff. I got laundry, man. Like, your audience gets frustrated with you. But that variety, when you start mixing in additional things, whether it be humor or horror, like that's one of the things that makes storytelling interesting, is when you can provide that particular alternative, that variety, because in a way it manages your expectations in a different way. It winds the road differently. So when you're watching a horror movie, you can't just have people getting killed over and over and over and over again. If you have a moment with some high drama where you have a character who breaks down because, the teenager that just died maybe saved her from suicide at some point. Like, that drama takes you out of the horror of what's going on. And it's like, oh my God, I feel so bad for this character. And you're not thinking about the fact that there's a monster wandering outside and this and that. You get a break, and your mind gets to reset and cool off. And that's what builds it back up. So like I talk about when I was constructing Haunted, one of the things that I bitched about, and even do it in the story, is that when you go on a haunted trail, it's just people popping out at you all the time. It's all it is. Every corner, someone pops out at you. And for the first 4 or 5 times, maybe it gets you, but there's diminishing returns every single time it repeats. So when you do that, you're lessening your emphasis. And that's what kills the people's enjoyment. They have to enjoy your art in one way or the other. I don't care if you have something where it's I don't want to use the word triggering because it sounds like I'm mocking it, but I'm not. But like, there are upsetting things, elements within stories sometimes. If you continuously hammer on that particular element, that's just torture porn. Like there are some sadists out there who dig that, and hey, props to you. But the universal audience is just like, I need something else here. I need something to hang my hat on to say, oh, that's what I liked about this. No one goes to an Avengers movie and says, oh, that action was awesome. No, you like the funny quips that Iron Man has with making fun of how much of a Boy Scout Captain America is, and you like how direct and to the point Batman is, and how quippy Flash can be, and this and that. That variety allows for contrast, which is something we've talked about, but it also provides opportunities for people to just kind of have the buffet. Everybody likes the buffet. Yeah. I'm jumping around from movies and food here, but they're collectively, I feel like they are all art, and they all illustrate the same point, which is I need a little bit of column A and column B and column C and column D, or otherwise I'm bored and I'm out. I'm not watching it. I'm not buying the DVD. I'm not eating that again. I'm not going to that restaurant. It's whatever it is. But if I have the option to learn something new, experience something new, I'm taking it. That's, you know what I mean? Sometimes when you drive to work every day, you take the same road and the same highway and the same exit, and you hit the same light and all this stuff. It gets boring. And then one day you think to yourself, you know what? I'm just going to drive the back roads today. And people do this because they want some variety in their life. It's like, you know what? I want to go on an adventure. And that's what entertainment really is when it comes down to it, is we want to break from the monotony of our daily lives. And that's one of the reasons why when we talked about amateur filmmaking, how every fucking one starts with a guy waking up in his bed and going to his dead-end office job. There's no variety there because I live that. You know what I mean? 9 times out of 10 people go to their dead-end retail job and they're just like, this shit sucks. Blah, blah, blah. I don't want to be reminded of that. I want to see wizards, and I want to see witches and goblins and mass murderers and crazy superheroes fighting aliens. Like, that's what I want to be entertained by. This is the variety of life here that I can't get because, as far as we know, there's no aliens, that are out and about talking to us. And, while there are witches, when you meet someone who claims to be a witch, you kind of want to poke, and I mean, it can be disrespectful at some points, but most people are interested. That unless you're like an uptight person and you're like very close-minded, most people are just interested to know about it. It's like, oh, do you do like seances? And then they're like, oh no, it's not that kind of witchcraft. And that kind of variety is the spice of life. It's the flavor that kind of makes the day-to-day routine, the monotony. It makes the repetition and the pattern worth paying attention to, because it contrasts it. And that's what I think. It's the diversity of art.
Yeah.
I'm rambling.
Absolutely.
Let's
No, it's the variety. Like we were saying, it's the variety of all those principles, and then also the variety of just, what's available in life. So finally,
let's bring it all together.
Let's bring it all. Unity is the feeling of harmony between all parts of the work of art, which creates a sense of completeness. It's very, very abstract, very vague, I feel like. But I guess when I was reading over it, I was like, well, basically you mean just a nice picture, like something that looks good, feels good, whatever,
Yeah.
Does it work? If it works, then it's properly unified.
Yes.
So bringing up some examples. This is actually a T-shirt design that I had done for my sister. It was for a Halloween-themed T-shirt, and we basically
Can I stop you for a quick second, because I have to ask a very important question here. Is she riding a Swiffer?
Yes.
That's fantastic. I know, because Hocus Pocus did the broom, the mop, and the vacuum, but I've never seen a witch on a Swiffer, and I just had to ask because that's awesome.
Yeah, I basically a witch riding a Swiffer, and so I actually picked this one for Unity because it's meant to be on a T-shirt. The background is non-existent basically, so the background for this has to be this full moon, and in this way, the whole composition becomes the shape in the object, whereas usually, there's a container for your image, right? Like on the canvas, the square or the rectangle of the canvas is usually the composition.
Yeah.
But with T-shirt designs, the actual whole shape of the picture becomes the composition. So you have to think in a more unified sense of what you're making, because what's going to attract people's eyes is the shape it makes on the blank canvas of the T-shirt. So that's that example. Next, I kind of pulled this at random because I was like, what are other? That last example was my best example for Unity, conceptually, and then this is another example that I picked in terms of, we have variations on a theme. So these 3 cartoon birds, each has a abstract shape floating above their head, as a cube, a sphere, a cylinder, a pyramid. And we're using proportion in terms of foreground. We have some rocks, and in the background we have some mountains to give a sense of scale, of depth, of space. So in this sense, we're using variety of a pattern. The pattern being, conceptually, the pattern is birds, but we're seeing variety in terms of shape, in terms of color. We're seeing a variety of shapes and colors once again, and we're using all of our. In this sense, I'm using all of the tools that I have available to me to make a composition and to make something that looks like a unified composition. So once again, in the same sense, but in a different way, because I like drawing rocks and trees. So we have a bunch of rocks, and these rocks are used as a main patterning tool in this composition. I wanted to draw these rocks to give a sense of. First of all, this is a river, right? And we have all these dry rocks to create a rhythm, right? And a repetition and a patterning and to create interest and to draw the eye into the composition. We see some more patterning with the lines used to convey motion and movement of this river that's moving from top right to bottom left. And we have further repetition of the trees receding into the background. So that's also an example of proportion. Once again, this creates a wholly unified picture where the main characters in it look like they're in an actual environment. So within the sense of, talking about comics, talking about illustration. So that's all I got for my visual examples for Unity. Do you have any thoughts in regards to that, Jow?
To me, when I'm thinking about Unity, I'm thinking about, does it make sense? Do I get it? And
yeah,
that's the big takeaway, I think, when a lot of people come to art, whether it's food, or a movie or a book or whatever it may be. Do I get it? Have I wasted my time? Did the artist or author or whoever it may be, did they understand these principles and use them to the correct, not the best of their ability, but the correct execution of them to serve the goal of the art? So I look at something like Tenet, which came out, and I don't know if you've seen it or not. I do not feel
an excellent example in terms of thinking about Unity, but not quite.
Yes.
Not quite getting there.
Not quite getting there, because there was everybody had an uproar about the audio in that film, and it was a very cerebral film. And the problem was, while the visuals were very groundbreaking and interesting to look at, the aesthetic was definitely there. The audio in the dialogue contained important information that we all needed to understand, and a lot of us didn't. At least not on initial viewing. It takes a lot of studying to get that particular film down in your mind. And when I'm watching that movie, I'm realizing that the Unity is completely falling apart. It's what most people in the film business call the lightning strike of everything happens perfectly. The art department, the score, the actors, the right writer, the right director, the right cinematographer, the right editor, when all those things magically come together, that's technically the unity that they're talking about. And to me, it's not some fucking wizardry that's just magically grabbed out of the air and it happens when the movie gods decide it. It's when there's a competent producer behind the project who knows that if I'm making this horror movie, I'm not hiring John Williams to do his Home Alone score. You know what I mean? Like, that one element will ruin the unity of the entire thing. And
I like where you're going with that.
If you don't understand the right elements, the right execution, then you have a mess. You either have a mess or you have par for the course. It's just business as usual. It's what everybody thought it was going to be. There's no surprise. There's no exhilaration or enjoyment of an adventure because we've taken this highway to work before. That's the problem. You know what I mean? Like, there's no variety to it. But when Unity comes into play, it's when a producer is like, okay, I know what kind of music serves this movie. It was when it's interesting to me when George Lucas made Star Wars. There was a very heavy studio push on him to do a very techno laser electronica type score because it was a science fiction movie. And George Lucas, in his infinite brilliantness, was able to say, no. This is Heroes with a Thousand Faces. This is the Odyssey. This is an epic, classic storytelling of good versus evil. And I don't need to change and pander to that particular science-y kind of score to get that point across. I think it's covered in the aesthetics. So he contrasted, he offered some variety in the score. He understood that classical John Williams score would work in service of the story he was trying to tell. It wasn't just about the visual effects, although you wouldn't know it by his later works. It was about the story of this character, this farm boy trying to make a difference in the universe, who saves the princess, yada, yada, yada. that's what that score needed. And he was right. That was the unity. And I feel like if we had some kind of electronica score underneath it, Star Wars would not be Star Wars. It just wouldn't.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that score is going back to our concept about unity, it's essential. It's an essential element of the movie, because I mean, there are videos going around on YouTube that like take scenes from Star Wars without any music at all, and it totally changes the mood. It totally changes how you feel about it. And it is definitely crucial in whether you're cooking, whether you're drawing, whether you're making a movie, a video game, whatever. Every element needs to reinforce the central theme, the central ideas. It needs to reinforce what it is that you want to get across. And if not done appropriately, the work will feel discombobulated. It'll feel confusing. It'll confuse the viewer and the person who's trying to enjoy it. And so I think ultimately Unity is sort of like the final piece on the pyramid of the principles of design. If you got it all, it's both the top and the base, basically, in a way.
It's the sandwich. So, it's the buns. It was like if you were constructing a burger. It's the top bun and the bottom bun that hold everything together. Yeah, absolutely. So we can wrap this up. We've gone longer than we typically do. But I feel like this has been a very constructive discussion that we've had, that I've hoped that our listeners and viewers today got something out of. So remember, you want to look up the principles of design, and I'm sure you can Google and look at images, and you've also got Mr. Rainwater's awesome art here that's evident of some of the things that we were talking about. But I do want to close with this very important point, which is that following these things isn't always the way to go. As the pirate code states, it's more like guidelines than actual rules. And as Picasso proved, as James Bond Casino Royale proved, sometimes you can break these things or subvert them in different ways, and that's what works in service of what your art is. And that's the real way to look at it, is not always how has it worked in the past, but how can it work for me? How can it work for this that I'm trying to do? And if you're right, it works. That's when the unity kicks in. If it doesn't work, well, lesson learned. Don't buck the system and keep trying to run against that same wall, but it might work on something else. It might not. That's the fun of art, is that puzzle, that mystery of assembling these principles in the way that supports your art, your story, your entree, your song, whatever it is that you're putting together. You have to figure out which particular angle to come at these particular principles in order to serve you as an artist, to make your signature. That's my takeaway from this for you guys.
Those are all the tools in the BAT utility belt, so to speak.
Yeah.
From there you can build so many other things and have so many different potential iterations and variations to deal with whatever situation you're going through. As an artist, if you're a freelance illustrator, these are all really great tools for graphic designers, because those all establish the basics by which you can do your job to get people's attention. These are all ways to get people's attention, and using them all together in ways that are harmonious and make sense, and develop around the to make your point. There you go. I think our point is made.
I think we're falling into repetition, which we will not do for like we did on episode 2. So that's it, guys. We will see you next week. Take it easy. Good luck out there.